Coming up on Network Africa. Ethiopia Prime Minister says withdrawal of forces from Tigray not a sign the government lost the war. Malian army says 4 soldiers killed in ambush in Timbuktu. Plus, two senior officials of Namibia's ruling party died from complications linked to COVID-19. The program, I'm Tenyola Shobowale. From Ethiopia's Tigray crisis to the situation in Burkina Faso, we begin the program with news and stories that made headlines over the weekend.
We begin in Ethiopia, where rebels in the Tigray region said on Sunday that they must be recognized as its legitimate government before they accept any ceasefire. The withdrawal of Eritrean troops was another precondition in a long list. Meanwhile, as top UN officials warned the Security Council that more than 400,000 people in Ethiopia's Tigray region are now in famine, and that there is a risk of more clashes in the region despite a unilateral ceasefire by the federal government.
One of the most distressing trends is an alarming rise in food insecurity and hunger due to conflict. More than 400,000 people are estimated to have crossed the threshold into famine, and another 1.8 million people are on the brink of famine. Some are suggesting that the numbers are even higher. 33,000 children are severely malnourished, and moreover, the food insecurity crisis will continue to worsen during the impending rainy season.
Away from the Tigray crisis, thousands took to the streets of Burkina Faso's capital on Saturday to call for a tougher government response to a wave of jihadist attacks that has destabilized the West African country in recent years. Some had traveled hundreds of kilometers to attend the opposition-led demonstration where protesters waved the red and green Burkinabe flag and blew whistles. Groups linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State originally based in neighboring Mali have embedded themselves across the north and east of the country, launching regular attacks on civilians, including one in June that killed more than 130 people, the worst in years. Also on Saturday, a South African court agreed to hear ex-President Jacob Zuma's challenge to a 15-month jail term for failing to attend a corruption hearing, as hundreds of his supporters gathered outside his home in a show of force. The Constitutional Court had on Tuesday last week given Jacob Zuma 15 months in jail for absconding in February from the inquiry led by the Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. Jacob Zuma had until the end of Sunday to turn himself in, but on Saturday the court agreed to hear his application, suspending the order.
So our main stories for the day. The Ethiopian Prime Minister says the recent withdrawal of troops and officials from the northern Tigray region should not be viewed as a sign that the government side lost the war. During an address to Parliament, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed claims that the 8-month conflict against Tigrayan rebels had weakened them. He added that the National Army still had the capacity to fight, but stressed the need for there to be peace in order for Ethiopia to develop. However, he did not respond to the rebel TPLF's list of preconditions for there to be a bilateral ceasefire. Still on the Tigray crisis, as hundreds of thousands of civilians experience famine-like conditions as a result of the conflict, an estimated 2 million people have been forced out of their homes. Many left with nothing but the clothes on their back, and memories of the horrors faced is still fresh.
Miret Geresgeha is a 25-year-old Ethiopian refugee living in a settlement in eastern Sudan. She's one of tens of thousands of people who crossed the border into Sudan after fighting broke out in Ethiopia's Tigray region in November 2020. Memories of the atrocities she witnessed are still fresh. Miret hid in the bush for 4 days and walked for long distances to Sudan.
I thought I wouldn't get out alive.
I was really scared. It was like we were watching a documentary on television, but it was happening to us in real life.
An estimated total of 2 million people have been displaced and more than 400,000 people are facing famine. The United Nations has said 5 million others need immediate food aid, the worst global food crisis in a decade. There are reports of brutal gang rapes and mass killings of civilians. At least 12 aid workers have been killed.
Children and mothers were raped. Women were suffering. Mothers gave birth, and on the same day, they had to run away on foot. We're just the lucky ones.
Despite the horrors she witnessed and endured, Mirat is doing her best to stay busy and productive. The former engineer supervises several construction projects around the settlement.
God tells us not to lose hope. I hope for peace in our country. Before, we didn't know the value of peace, but now we know how important it is because we have lost it.
Many Ethiopians who crossed the border to Sudan have been relocated to refugee settlements where the UN Refugee Agency and partners are providing basic services. The UNHCR says more support and funding is urgently needed to assist refugees like Mirat heal from the trauma they have experienced and build their lives.
Well, to another security situation here in Nigeria. It's another sad day for residents in Kaduna State as kidnappers have attacked yet another school, abducting some students. The bandits invaded the Bethel Baptist Secondary School in Chikun local government, shooting sporadically before taking the students away. Well, 4 of them managed to escape, while the joint security operatives who responded to the attack say they were able to rescue another 26.
News of an early morning abduction of students from Bethel Baptist School in Kaduna brings anxious parents and other relatives rushing down to the premises of the boarding school located along Kaduna-Kachia Road, Chikun local government area of the state.
What will I tell her? What will I tell her?
Attacks on schools are now becoming common in Kaduna State, with many families sleeping less at night, worried about the next target.
God, is this me? No. God, I have to tell you, I am not pleased. Father, in Jesus' name.
Now they raise their voices in prayers, individually and collectively, seeking divine intervention for the safe return of their children.
It's only the students that were taken away. None of the staff is among them. So for me to meet the house master, who's in charge of them here, he too was able to escape with his own family. He managed to send his wife there on the other wall there and cross to call for rescue. And that thing happened, as he was saying, about 15 minutes after 1. That was then. And the whole operation starts in 15 minutes time to his own due, not knowing that they have placed all over.
According to eyewitness reports, the attackers stormed the school early Monday morning and began shooting to cause panic before abducting the students. 4 were lucky to escape, but it's not clear how many were taken away.
Here people, they drag, they do. I just wake up, I say who I thought that my student won't see me. So as they say, hey, open that door, if not I will shoot you. Then I tell them, say, me, I know where, the hand know where. So I say, I cannot open the door. So he forced the door and pushed the door open. He said, bring all your answers and money. We say, see the money when we have. We go open our box, remove the money when they pay us the day before yesterday. Then we give them. They say, okay, no any money again. I say, no money. We are 2. So they said, oh, let's go. I say, oh God, see my leg, but I know where. Wait, come on, let's go. So I begin to follow them. As we reach there, they said I should come back. Then they carry my second go.
Security operatives not far from the school attempted to repel the attack. 2 of them lost their lives in the process. The attack comes the day after bandits also abducted several people, including infants, from the residential quarters of the National Tuberculosis and Leprosy Center in Zaria, Kaduna State, on Sunday.
Well, still in West Africa, over in Mali, 4 soldiers have been killed after their patrol was ambushed in the Timbuktu region near the town of Lere. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack, but Islamist militants linked to Al-Qaeda are active in the area. France, which has deployed over 5,000 troops in Mali, said last week it has resumed joint military operations in the country after they were suspended in May following the country's second coup in less than a year. Some updates on the COVID-19 pandemic now. Ugandans who violate the COVID-19 pandemic control restrictions may go to jail for up to 2 months. According to new rules released by the Health Ministry, those found operating banned businesses such as bars, nightclubs, cinemas and shops selling non-food items face time in prison. Current lockdown measures also restrict cultural ceremonies like weddings to only 20 people, and anyone found hosting a larger number might be jailed. Not wearing a mask outside of one's residence or assisting someone to escape from isolation could also land one in jail. Uganda is currently going through a second wave of the pandemic. More than 83,000 positive cases and over 1,900 deaths have been recorded in the country. Ugandan journalist Ismail Adu joins us now for more on this. Ismail, these are pretty tough measures announced. How are Ugandans reacting to the fact that they could be facing up to 2 months in jail for breaking COVID-19 rules?
Well, actually, people care about survival. Most of them are concerned about bread and butter issue. Despite those proposals that were first expressed by the president a couple of weeks ago. But it seems people, are not too much concerned about that. They are going about looking for what to eat, trying to fend for themselves, and that's what is important at the moment.
Yeah, I was going to ask how much this is likely to change anything. We have to remember that security forces have in some cases meted out violence on the public while enforcing control measures. And there are reports of several people being killed in the past. Are there fears that we could see a repeat of this abuse with these new measures?
Yes, to some extent, the COVID fight has been militarized. And it's been a concern. A few human rights activists have expressed disappointment as far as that is concerned. A few opposition leaders have also expressed their views. They don't like it. My personal view is that there should be much more of civic education rather than kind of a combat military way of trying to contain this virus.
All right, then. Ugandan journalist Ismail Adu, thank you so much for your time and bringing us up to speed on the situation in the country.
Thank you.
We'll have more on the COVID-19 pandemic in just a moment. Plus, Egypt agrees deal to release ship that blocked the Suez Canal. That's in a moment. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Still on the COVID-19 pandemic, the Speaker of the Mozambican Parliament, Esperança Bias, has gone into isolation after testing positive for the coronavirus. Ms. Bias was tested before embarking on a business trip abroad. The Parliament, in a press release, urged all those who had been in contact with the Speaker to self-isolate in accordance with the guidelines. Mozambican jazz musician Moria Chongwika is also in isolation after contracting the virus. The country has recorded increased virus cases, with data from the last 24 hours showing that 938 people tested positive and 7 died from the virus. The country has also recorded 71,634 positive cases since March last year. And over in southern Africa, 2 senior officials of Namibia's ruling party, SWAPO, have died from complications linked to COVID-19. 63-year-old Chief Samuel Ankama, Deputy Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, and Kilos Nguava passed away over the weekend. In the last 10 days, 9 national leaders have also died from coronavirus. On Saturday alone, Namibia's health ministry recorded 1,656 new cases of coronavirus, and it says 23 people died on that day of the virus. The country now has a 46% positivity rate among new coronavirus test results. And over in South Africa, the Health Products Regulatory Authority has authorized the use of the Sinovac COVID-19 vaccine. With the country's slow vaccination rollout program being criticized in different sectors, the authorization of the Sinovac jab is seen as a turning point and much-needed relief. Speaking with our South Africa correspondent, Brian Pugeni, Professor of Vaccinology at the University of Witwatersrand, Shaber Madi, says that the government's main aim should be inoculating the most vulnerable of the population. A little over 3 million people have been vaccinated so far, a far cry from the government's target of 40 million by the end of the year.
Yes, so the vaccine program obviously is extremely sluggish at the moment. The 3 million you referred to is roughly about 5% of the South African population. And right now, the Department of Health, at least in South Africa, hasn't met its own target, which is set to complete vaccination of people above the age of 60. Currently, it's only about 40% of people above the age of 60 that have been vaccinated. But the more important issue is that it's not necessary for South Africa to vaccinate 40 million people to be able to get back to a relatively normal lifestyle. The target is really vaccinating those 15 to 17 million people that are above the age of 60, as well as people with other medical conditions that are at high risk of ending up in hospital and dying of COVID-19. If we're able to get adequate penetration of the vaccine in those groups, about 80% coverage, we would still be able to get back to a relatively normal lifestyle, even with the virus continue circulating in our midst. Previously, the estimate of needing to vaccinate 40 million people was based on some aspirational goal of getting to herd immunity, which essentially means that you've brought about the complete disruption of the transmission of the virus. Unfortunately, that's no longer it's no longer even an aspirational goal for countries such as South Africa. Because of the evolution of the virus, we can expect the virus to continue circulating probably for the rest of our lifetimes.
Now, more on South Africa's former president, Jacob Zuma's sentencing now. The former president has failed to hand himself over to his nearest police station following a constitutional court ruling in his contempt of court charge. Briefing the media at his homestead in KwaZulu-Natal, he explains why he's still a free man and what legal action he has taken. He also insinuated that the apartheid government, which he fought against, treated him better than the current one. He also adds that he believes the courts were being used by his political opponents to settle scores. Zuma's legal team is expected to argue on Tuesday that his sentence must be stayed pending the outcome of his challenge application.
You want me to hand myself over? Okay. No. I think the initiative that we undertook with my team to submit papers to the Constitutional Court that they must reconsider their decision. And they're accepting those papers. It meant that, therefore, they can't accept the papers and expect me to go to jail.
What has happened is this. 2 applications were launched on Friday, right? The first application was to the Constitutional Court for the rescission of the order and judgment that was given on the 29th. Now, rescission is just a legalese word. It simply means that that decision must be set aside on the basis of errors and omissions in the judgment. Okay? Now, the second application was brought to the Pietermaritzburg High Court. That application is going to be heard this Tuesday. The first application to the Constitutional Court was a normal application. The second one was an urgent application. Right? The urgent application was brought to sit down on Tuesday simply because, as you know, that there were 2 deadlines. There's one of today, then there was the other one of 3 days thereafter for the police. And its intention was to suspend the arrest order or to interdict the Minister of Police and the National Commissioner from executing that order.
Away from South Africa, South Sudan's President Salva Kiir has reconstituted the upper house of parliament, the Council of State, in line with the revitalized peace agreement from September 2018. The weekend announcement paves the way for the appointment of legislators from the opposition side in the conflict to the Council of State, which will now consist of representatives of the 10 regional states. The peace agreement expands the upper house from previously 50 to 100 representatives. The appointed members of the reconstituted Council of State and the 550 MPs appointed for the lower house of parliament are expected to be sworn in on Friday during the country's 10th anniversary of independence. Several years after fleeing their villages following attacks by non-state armed groups, hundreds of thousands of Chadian IDPs and refugees are still unable to return home and are trying to rebuild their lives in the communities that host them. Inside Chad, the scale and frequency of attacks against civilians by jihadist groups has decreased over the past year, but the threat is still very real.
Alimi may have built a new life for himself here, but he remains nostalgic for the one he left behind. He fled to the camp with his 3 wives and 11 children after a sudden violent attack on his home village.
When we arrived, we were like strangers. We slept under the trees. We had nothing. Then we went to the bush to collect straw and wood, and we built shelters. Humanitarian organizations also helped us. They built us 2 shelters.
7 of Alimi's relatives were killed that night, while 13 of his nieces and nephews were kidnapped. When they first came to Forkloom 7 years ago, the camp was much smaller. Today, the site stretches as far as the eye can see. Half of Lake Province's inhabitants, 450 people, are displaced. Most are internally displaced people from other parts of the region or country, numbering more than 400,000. Alongside them are 30,000 former Chadian refugees who have returned from neighboring countries, often because of rising jihadist threats.
It is thanks to this small business that I've set up here that my family can eat, dress, and take care of themselves. What we want now that we are here is to learn something that can help us in the future. We can't go home. We are really just waiting to see what tomorrow brings.
The region also hosts more than 16,000 refugees from Nigeria and Niger. In total, there are 229 sites hosting IDPs and refugees in the area. Although the scale and frequency of attacks against civilians by jihadist groups has decreased over the past year, waves of fresh displacement have taken place since 2015, and the total IDP population in Lake Province has increased by 16% since March 2020, with most of the newly displaced fleeing islands on Lake Chad where jihadist groups remain active.
And finally on the program, Egypt will release the container ship that blocked the Suez Canal in March after it agreed a compensation deal with the vessel's owners and insurers. The two sides said the Ever Given would be allowed on Wednesday to leave the Great Bitter Lake, the canal's midway point where it has been impounded. The deal's terms were not revealed, but Egypt had demanded $550 million. The 400-meter-long Ever Given became wedged across the canal after running aground amid high winds. It was freed 6 days later following a salvage operation in which one person was killed. And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shubowale. Bye for now.